for organizing these. You did another one that was really excellent. It's a good thing. Yeah, I'm sort of the boring part after the last Ethiopia. But I guess the legal issues. It's really about peace of mind and making sure that you've got everything lined up. And we're seeing some emerging issues in my law practice, and I spend a lot of time talking to other lawyers. There are state programs in Toronto that I go to regularly. Yesterday I was out walking in Muskoka with a judge friend, and we were comparing sort of stories on what's happening. One of the things that's happening, people are living a lot longer. So when many of the things I'm going to say actually probably everybody over 18 should do. And to begin with, everyone needs a will and everyone needs power of attorneys. One for property, which is financial and property, and the other is for personal care. And I'll tell you why I think it's important when you retire, because you want to enjoy your retirement. You don't want to have to think about it. We see families who panic, who say, my parents in the hospital, they're going to have to go into long-term care, whatever that, and they don't have a power of attorney, or they can't find the power of attorney, or do they have a will? And in some cases, you can be fine without a will. But I'll tell you, a power of attorney is extraordinarily important. I'll just start out with the personal care. The personal care is really about you giving direction to your family or friends on things like what kind of medication you want, whether you want to be kept alive by artificial means. And from the courses I was starting to go, we had long ones, details of restrictions and things. And then I started looking into my clients' eyes as they were reading them. And I'm now suggesting shorter ones unless people really want all the details. But the personal care could be as simple as deciding what medical care you needed or what kind of medicine you needed if you were not able to make that decision yourself. The really good news is that decision cannot be made in Ontario without a medical doctor. So people can't just pull the plug on their own. But I had a law client named me as power of attorney for property and personal care, and I did not know about this. And one of the things I had to do was go down to the rehabilitation hospital with them in Toronto, and they were one of the decisions they had to make was to inject Botox in his leg because it might help his stroke. So that, is as simple as that. The power of attorney for property, I just can't emphasize how important it is. I tell people, if you don't want to pay legal fees, then at least go online and get a copy from the Public Trustee's office in Ontario. Make sure you've got 2 witnesses that are not named in the power of attorney and have it in place. Today, when power of attorneys are needed, most lending institutions want a notarial certificate from a lawyer saying it is a proper legal document. They're very concerned about fraud. But I'll tell you what happens if you don't have a proper power of attorney. You end up having either the Public Trustee's office involved, which is a government agency handling all the money, or you have to get a court order, which is expensive. And somebody told me I'm a storyteller, so I'll give you a couple of examples, or one at least. A young woman, 61, had a stroke, and her assets were only about $129,000. Well, she didn't have a power of attorney in place, and the Public Trustee's office was involved, and then they handled every single cent. And her mother was still alive in good health. She had a brother and sister, but they couldn't even buy her clothes without going through the Public Trustee's office. So it's a really important, very simple little document. The next one is wills, and a will applies if you die. And again, if you were a situation where there's a spouse, husband and wife, and 2 children, and you don't have a will, and the children are over 18, it's probably going to be okay. But where you get into the various complications are, we have separations, we have people living common law, we have children under 18, And it can get very, very complicated, and not just complicated. There are some litigation lawyers in Toronto who are making a mint out of people having wills, either not having wills or people who do not have the proper wills. If you are legally married, you have a responsibility to your spouse. It's give or take 50% of the estate. If you have children under 18, or probably under 25, under 23 for sure, the highest I know the court has done is 23. If they're in school, you have an obligation to provide for them because you're supporting them. And then one of the recent courses I went to said even if your child moves back with you and they're dependent upon you, you probably have to provide for them in your will. So there are new emerging kind of issues in wills. And I'd be happy to answer questions about it, because I'm not sure there's so many varieties of issues that I could talk about wills. One of the really important ones is to make sure that you have a proper executor or trustee in the will. This is the same for power of attorneys as well. Again, we're starting to see some new issues. So here's an example. Husband dies, he's a funeral director, and he leaves his wife and another person as the joint executors of his estate. What he had not contemplated was that she would live to late into her 90s. So this is the new issue. She's in a nursing home. She's been appointed as a trustee, executive trustee, and she really can't make any of those decisions. So we were about to bring a court action, and we're sort of holding off, and then she died, which made our life simpler, except that, and I'm so glad I didn't do this will, they had named the two people, and they had named us. They said if either one of the people named as trustees or executors refused to act or was unable to act or died, then Uncle got appointed. And Uncle unfortunately lives in northern Alberta, and he's now 88, and he's in a seniors facility. So clearly, and this estate is worth $2 million. So we are now having to get a court order to get Uncle off, and he's consented to that. But I'm glad it's not Newmarket or Toronto, because it's a smaller court, and hopefully it won't be too fussy. But we really don't know what the court is going to require. We had Uncle go see a lawyer, but they may require a whole bunch of affidavit evidence. I don't know. So it's the issues there are people are living a lot longer. So with the power of attorney, it's the same thing. I just did power of attorney for someone where they are not, husband and wife are not appointing each other. They're both in their 80s. They have a fair amount of money, and they are appointing all 3 daughters now, as opposed to each other, because they have realized that, we're already mid-80s, we're in good health, but if this power of attorney is ever needed, the other person might not be competent. And then, you're into a situation of probably having to get doctor's letters and medical information that your spouse is not able to do that power of attorney. So again, the fact that people are living a lot longer has really changed the picture. The other thing, somewhere around 90, I have found that most people just don't want to do it. They, who wants to have to deal with the power of attorney or being executor of a will, because there's a huge responsibility with that. You're handling money, and many people just don't want to be bothered with it. Okay, now, one thing when I was starting to think about today, Mary, and what to talk about, I think the first thing, if I were going to retire, and advise people to do would be to sit down and make a list of all your assets. So your house, your bank accounts, your life insurance, your cars, if you have property out of Ontario, but make a list, a detailed list. And then go through and check that everything is in place the way you want it to be. For example, if you have life insurance, do you have a named beneficiary? Because if you have a named beneficiary, then it doesn't go through a will. It goes automatically to that person. And it's a matter of making sure everything makes sense, going through. And the good news about that's probably once you retire one day doing this, and then maybe more than one day, but going through and just checking with your bank that everything is the way you think it should be. And then the second part of that is going through and talking to someone about that, sharing that. You may want to have a financial advisor, but probably a very close family member or friend should have a copy of what you own. Now we're seeing lawyers in general are talking about the terrible disputes in families these days. Unfortunately, we tend to see the bad ones, but and I know there's some really good families. I have two sons in the early 30s who I'm absolutely positive would not get into fighting over an estate. But somebody needs to know what you own. And one of the reasons is I am absolutely sure that there are millions of dollars in bank accounts and in life insurance policies that nobody even knows about. And who knows? Because if you don't have a list somewhere, and how are they going to find the asset? And I've seen people in this area who might have 5 or 6 different bank accounts. And so if someone died in King City, for example, and they didn't have a will and we weren't sure what they owned, we could do a little letter to all the banks here. But I found they might want to have one in Schaumburg, they want to have the Newmarket, or even Toronto, because maybe they work there at that point. So I suspect there's quite a bit of unclaimed money in those places. And what I'd suggest, and for example, RRSPs or RIFs, you'll want to have a named beneficiary. If you're husband and wife, you will want to name each other, or common law spouse, you'll want to name each other, because then that money does not go through the estate, and it's very easy accessible to your beneficiaries. You want to make the estate, I think, easy for your beneficiaries. You're not going to be around, but on the other hand, we see things that it's just unnecessary to have the hassle, and there's no question there are extra legal fees, and they can become very, very substantial. And again, little story, client dies who I knew very well, and I can't believe he didn't ask me to do a will. He's 64, had a stroke, he didn't have a will. Very brilliant man, so it's unfortunate that I don't know why. He had named a family member. He wasn't married and didn't have children. He named a family member on a RIF, or it was actually an RSP at that point, and it's a fair amount of money, like $250,000. He then transferred. He didn't, but that company sold to another company, and in the process, the named beneficiary didn't carry over. So it's now the beneficiary is the estate, which means that beneficiary is only going to get half. Another sibling who lives thousands of miles away, who has not had any dealings with this man in years, is going to get whatever, $125,000 or something, which I do not believe is the intention of the deceased. So that's sort of sitting down and doing that. And then at the same time, may I say, good time to list all your credit cards, look at them carefully. I personally think in the next number of years, we are going to see incredible attempts at fraud among seniors. And not just seniors, but seniors are going to be the target. I have no idea how they find information, but I was in Muskoka on Friday night about 6 o'clock, and I see driving, and I see a phone number coming in, and it's a Richmond Hill number, 905-884, I think. Okay, who do I know in Richmond Hill? Because normally, you don't want to start taking law clients' calls after 5 o'clock on a Friday night. I thought, must be somebody who really needs me. So I take the call. It says, Margaret, I'm desperate. I've been getting these calls from Revenue Canada that I haven't paid them, and I'm sure I don't own anything. And they said that there's a police officer coming, and he's going to arrest me, and they're suing me, and rah, rah, rah. Now, probably everybody in this room knows that that's a fraud. And they've been talking about this fraud for a number of years, but in the last 24 hours, there were more frauds. So I said to her, calm down. It's definitely a fraud, but let me pull off the side of the road and do a little Google search and tell you who to call or whatever. So I did that, and I don't know how old she is, but I think probably late 60s. She's not old. but not a techie person, I guess. So I pulled over, and of course, 23 hours before that, there was another warning by the police, and there was a number to call. And then when I got landed, I looked it up again, and there was another number to call. So I said, call the police, or call this number, report it. But she was quite frightened. And Mary's a good person here. I think those are kind of things that we're going to be needing to warn families and people about, because the retirement generation that is over 65 are a fairly trusting group of people. I think people are fairly trusting. So you get a call from Revenue Canada, you think it must be real, but it's not just Revenue Canada. It could be anything at all. A credit card has expired and that sort of thing. So I would sit down and make copies of all your documents and your credit cards. Look at the amounts. Do you really need that $20,000 on the credit card, if that's what it is? And review these with your families and make copies of them. Because again, a couple little stories. I have now known 3 people in the last few months who have lost their ID. One, a man in his early 30s, was in Arizona, and somebody stole his passport, and he had a little difficulty getting back into Canada. I knew him very well, so that helped, but he got back in. Another was a client from this area who I had to get copies of her driver's license because she was selling a property. And I get the panic call from somewhere in southern United States saying, I think you've got a color copy of my driver's license and I need it desperately. Everything had been stolen. Her cell phone, her computer, all her ID. And so fortunately, I was able to, and I knew her voice well, fortunately, I was able to fax her a copy of her ID, and she got back into Canada. I haven't talked to her since, so it must have been easy to get back. But I also say when people go out of Ontario at all, then make sure someone else has a copy of your identification, your passport, your driver's license, all of that. The other one, the third one, was a young fellow in his 20s. So I say, again, this is not age-related or retirement age. It's something we all need to be worried about. He was in Nicaragua and lost everything. And I got a panic call from his mother. He was a friend of our son's in Montessori school in Noble, can you imagine? So because I knew him, I knew his birth date, I was able to talk to Immigration Canada, called me. There apparently had to be 3 people, and it was to give information. And by the way, he got back into Canada, but apparently Nicaragua would be a fairly dangerous place to be without any identification at all. So, and then just to go on that, this includes your OHIP cards and your driver's license, looking at the expiry dates, like list them down, because we have another one right now where the woman is from Italy and came here, is landed immigrant, the whole thing, has an OHIP card, but now they're upgrading these OHIP cards. She has the old red one without the photograph, and they are saying it is expired. Well, she can't find her immigration papers. She's in her 80s and she can't find them. So her daughter was in a panic at the office the other day, and I went online. I found the area where you could look for immigration papers to get them faster for emergency and things like that. But again, keeping all of your documents in a safe place. It could be a safety deposit box in a bank, but even then you will want to make sure someone else has a key for that you can trust. You know, a family member, probably best to have one of your children or a couple of them. But I'm actually seeing these issues. These are not things, these are like issues that I see every day. So our problem is this woman is in her mid-80s and she needs medical care. So actually, Mary, I sent them off. I sent her off. I gave her the website, the whole thing, but I also said to call their MP and their MPP. Because there were 2 issues. The MP, the federal MP, is immigration, so that should help getting the immigration documents. And then the provincial is the OHIP card. But I think you're going to see a bunch of these because people are living a lot longer, and where's the OHIP card? You know, where did I put that? In this case, the woman had moved recently from a house they'd lived in a long, long time, and she couldn't find her immigration period. So, and by the way, that's, again, not terribly age-related. I actually do that. I have a complete copy of all my documents, and I have them in a safe place, and I have someone who knows where they are. So. Okay, now, if you own property out of Ontario, you'll need advice on that. If you have a place in Florida or something, you need advice from a lawyer there. You probably need a lawyer just to make sure that the same rules apply. And joint assets. There are, if you go online, you will find people telling you to put everything in joint names with your children or something, if your spouse is already deceased. If you're legally married or in a long-term common relationship and you've got advice from a lawyer on how that should be, then it's really excellent if you have everything joint. Bank accounts, real estate, the house, because if something happens to one of you, it automatically goes to survivor. You have almost no legal fees. I'm also always counseling people on how to have very little legal fees, because if your spouse dies, it's a big deal. It is pretty overwhelming. And so to have to worry about getting probate of the will and getting the house transferred is a pretty big thing for people to do. I just observe it at any age, but certainly as people retire. It's just a worry you don't want to have. However, putting your house jointly with your children is a thing that you'd want to have a bunch of advice from legal people and accountants, because your house is a principal residence. It's completely exempt from capital gains, and you might end up having a bunch of tax payable on your estate. But also we have to consider what would happen if something happened to that child or those children. How would that figure out? So again, a little example. We had a client in Schaumburg in her 80s. She had some investments, and she set up 5 different accounts for 5 children, jointly, every one. So if she died, it automatically goes to that child. What she hadn't contemplated is that one of the children would predecease her. And she's a very intelligent woman, I'll tell you, because I don't think most people would think about it. She called me and said, I need to change my will, and I need to change this. She got advice, because what happened, that 1/5 share would have gone back in the estate to the other 4 children. And what she intended was that it would go to the grandchildren, to that daughter's children. So, and that particular family, I think they'd probably work it out, but you don't know. I'm surprised by some of the things that I see. So that's the gifting of property. Legal capacity. Again, this is an emerging thing. I think if I hear one more child tell me that their parent is getting Alzheimer's or dementia and is incompetent, I'm going to start screaming. There's a whole thing out there where they say their parents have dementia. And I also think there are a bunch of medical people there that once they hear that, they get very, very concerned because of liabilities, So, and that may be true, that people have dementia, but I think a lot of times they don't. They may have a little loss of memory, but that's about it. But the legal capacity becomes very important, because once you are judged to not have the proper legal capacity, you can't change any of this. You can't change your will, you can't change your power of attorney, you can't change the ownership of any of your property. So when you retire, you want to be pretty sure it's what you want. Again, another example, clients in their 80s made their wills, 3 shares for the children. And the one daughter, they said, well, I don't think she's capable of handling money. We want our son-in-law to have control over that. Well, fortunately, they were still competent to change the will, because they found out the daughter was fine. It was the son-in-law who was spending the money. So you want to really be careful that you've thought it out. And if you were going to if you didn't have joint assets and you're legally married to somebody, you need to make sure that the will covers that, or you'll be into some major litigation. Now, what else did I want to tell you? Oh, on the fraud thing, if you look at your home owner's policy of your house, it probably has something in for fraud. It's probably not very much, but it may be enough to cover credit cards if something happened. and for your house, title insurance. Now, if you have a mortgage in your house, you will have title insurance. But title insurance has come into Ontario as an American product, and that will cover you for fraud. And that's one of the reasons for people having it as we go on here. Other reasons too. There are legal reasons that protect you as well. So now I think I'll end it there. And does anybody have any questions? Or yes?
Can you just add a little bit more to title fraud? I bought title insurance years ago.
Yes.
Like 10 years ago.
Yes.
It's a one-shot deal. I
Yes.
think it was, and that's all I need.
Yes.
Am
Yes.
I covered for life? For
You
that?
are. Yeah, it's people will say, oh, the title insurance is whatever, it depends on the value of your house. But it's a one-shot thing.
Oh.
And it's a very, very good protection.
That's because I also have the additional insurance with my homeowners and auto insurance. There's another little piece that's added for fraud there as well too.
Yes, that's excellent to have. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah.
One comment and a question that one lady asked me to ask, and she's gone, but your comments about tracking all of our paperwork and our documents and our bank accounts and insurance policies, something that I notice when I talk to people is all of our online passwords to get into bank accounts and all of those things. And those are tricky enough to remember, but as we're making lists of all of our assets and things, make a list of all of our passwords to get into even your computer.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
to log on to your bank account. I mean, that's just one of the things that I think people should add to the list of using the internet for those kinds of things.
And then you'll want to make sure that they are with honest people because I've seen a few things I got a little concerned about in the States where the people can, in the one case I'm thinking they were very honest people, but they continued to pay bills because it was easier because they had the mother's password. But legally that's probably not very proper. Anyway, and in terms of legal fees and things like that for doing wills and power of attorneys, we'll get people calling in to find out about legal fees. And I can tell you the cheapest, best service you get in any law office is the wills and power of attorney. It's just so incredibly important. I don't know where to begin in saying that it's really important for your future.
And the question that the lady asked me to ask is, the topic of the cottage comes up.
Yes,
a lot.
the
in
cottage.
retirement.
Yes.
And what do we do with the cottage? So not that you can answer that specifically, but what are your thoughts around that whole umbrella thing called the cottage?
It is huge. It is huge. So one family I know, they all got along, 5 children. They set up their own limited company to own the cottage. And then they had it all sorted out. Everybody took turns, had a joint bank account. A year later, one of them bought the others out. It just doesn't work. So trying to have a joint cottage, I don't know, maybe somebody has special children that I don't know about, but it is quite a process, like who cleans up afterward, all of that. One of the problems with the cottage is capital gains. Your house is exempt from capital gains. So when you die, if you bought it for $100,000 and it's worth $1 million, then that just goes in the estate. The cottage, on the other hand, is subject to capital gains, and many people bought them a long time ago. So if you bought it before 1971, the D-Day for tax purposes is December 31st, 1971. And I can tell you in Muskoka, people bought them for $78,000 or $1,000 and they're worth a few million now, just the land alone. So that's a consideration on the cottage. If you have life insurance already in place that you could keep on to pay for capital gains, that would work, but that is often consideration as well. But the cottage is a huge issue with families. I don't know whether I could help you there or not. I mean, you could transfer it during your lifetime. Like you could gift it to your children during your lifetime, but you're going to pay the capital gains right then. And that's the problem. The capital gains is, give or take, 25% of the increase in value.
And a related question to that, if you own your own home with your spouse, that's called the matrimonial home, right?
Yes.
Or I think that's what
Yes.
you call it, right? Do you have to have your matrimonial home in Ontario?
You see, the law would be Ontario here. Yes, you see, because if we're out of Ontario, other laws would apply. So, for example, suppose you have a property in, I just talked to somebody who had one in the Cayman Islands. Then you could designate your cottage as your principal residence. So there are people doing that where they have a Florida residence, and then you can actually designate your cottage as a principal residence, and at least that will cover some of the capital gains depending on how long it's been your residence. Yes?
The scenario where you own a home and a cottage.
Yes.
And you sell one of them. As a couple, you could only have one primary residence.
That's right. So you could do either one. Like you could, yeah.
But if I sell my home today and I move to my cottage, I have deemed my home as sold. I take capital gains on that.
Yeah. Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Let me ask a hypothetical. What if I divorce my wife for the purpose of that? So we
Watch this. For the purpose of doing it?
Yes.
Well, and I got to tell you, as a lawyer, you go like this and you go like this. Revenue Canada, I mean, I don't know whether they'd find out or not, but you probably wouldn't even have to divorce, but you'd need legal separation agreements. And I'm sure that Revenue Canada asks a bunch of questions, including did you have separate lawyers and where are you living? Yeah. Oh, the other thing we're seeing that just drives me insane, and fortunately I've not drawn these wills, and please forgive me, whoever's up there, if I have, where parents are leaving money, don't leave it until their children are 40 or 50, or grandchildren are 40 or 50. So we've got one right now, it's just being wrapped up, where the man died in 1967. And there were all the executors that were in line. The executors have died, and then in line under the Estate Act, there you go, it's wife and children and whatever. All of them have died except the grandson, so he's the only one. And we needed him appointed. And by the way, that went to Toronto, and Toronto did it very quickly. So Toronto tends to be a little, slower doing it. And but the grandfather had said that if one of the children died, so this is now the grandson's children, that if he died before the youngest is 40, then that child, that's as a great-grandchild, gets the share. So one of the children is turning 40 in about a year. And then we'll be able to wind up this estate. But because then the daughter, the granddaughter will release, etc. But these are the kind of problems we're having, and I can only say, we're not going to be around, so don't hold it up till somebody's 40. I mean, there are some cases where you need to do that. If you have someone with special needs, we call it a Henson clause. Henson clause is really just named after a case Henson. It's not a legal term, but there was a case, it was Ree Henson, and you then can set up a trust, and there are reasons to have trust in a will. There's no question, but you really only want to do it when you have to do it. And then make sure you've got some young executors. The executors and power of attorneys, I would have at least 2, and I'd suggest that they be younger than you are. Again, here, one more story here. Client is 91. All 3 of his children have predeceased him. And then he has an ex-wife. He's divorced, and he's got a couple of grandchildren. He hasn't seen, but he's seeing them now. Calls me the other day and tells me that there's this woman he's been seeing for the last 20-some years might be a common law wife. So I'm going, oh dear, oh dear. Well, if she is, we will need to provide for her in your will. So they're those kind of issues. Like, who would have thought that would happen? And to think your child might predecease you is very, very unusual. But it happens, and in our wills we cover those eventualities. Yes.
Another question. Within power of attorney for property, it's my understanding you could appoint a trust company, for example, to
yes.
manage your affairs.
Yes, you could.
But
yes.
my thoughts go to somebody who truly has nobody in this world for their care.
Right.
I'm sure you've seen situations like that, and if they have enough assets, yes, the trust company will take them on as a client, but what are your thoughts around who helps this poor soul who really has nobody to decide their care? What happens to that person?
You have a trust company or a bank or something, which is really strange. I think you have to find someone, but I think that I've been feeling for some time that we're going to need an advocacy group for seniors that will be paid for their services. The problem is they will need to be bonded and they will be honest, because I hear stories all the time where a caregiver has taken money from a deceased, or the children think the caregiver has taken. That's, who knows. An example, again, from this area, I won't get any more detailed than that. A woman was divorced and living single for the last about 30 years of her life. She dies in her mid-80s a couple of years ago. We find a weird thing on their house title. It's a construction lien. And so the beneficiary of the estate, who is the daughter of her best friend who has now died, the best friend who died, said she wouldn't have a debt to anyone. And I knew her. It's just no way she wouldn't. It's crazy. She wouldn't have a construction lien, which a construction lien when somebody did construction in your house, you didn't pay them. And it was back to, I think, 1993. So we called the lawyers who filed it. They said they didn't have a file. Then we looked up the name of the people that had put the lien on. It was a company. We got the principals of the company. We did a corporate search. And we found out, we can look on our title and actually see what property you own in Ontario. We have to look every single region, so it's not easy to do. But we looked in Toronto, and we found that there have been 2 transfers of title with these people, and we contacted the lawyer who did them. And he, to his credit, I called him directly, and he was fairly rude when I called him and abrupt. But to his credit, he called back and said, "They're not returning my calls." Well, then the beneficiary executor put it together. The people who had done some work on her house, not construction, but some other things, had befriended her, and she had given them $100,000. And so we think that it may be the same people, because they didn't return our call about discharging this lien. So we had to get a court order to discharge this construction lien. But what happened is, and I was going to talk about this as part of fraud. It happened, and she wasn't that old. She's probably 65 or something. But they befriended her, and the minute they got the money, she never saw them again. So she knew things were bad. Well, then she was embarrassed and didn't want to tell anybody. And finally, a few years later, told her best friend. But, there are situations like that. So I've decided, I don't know what age it is, but shortly I'll figure out what age it is. I'm going to make sure that I put a limitation on my bank accounts. And I had a retired lawyer who was acting for, and he got very concerned that he said, what if, and the family were concerned about, what if, people got old and started, because they have a fair amount of money, and started, giving away money to someone, because and my father lived to be 91 in excellent shape in King. He was a farmer in King, and never needed care, and did his own banking and all that sort of stuff. And then suddenly just had a rhythmic heartbeat and died in a couple of weeks. But when he was about 90, he started getting calls from some real estate agents telling him his house was worth a lot of money and various stuff. So finally I said, okay, Dad, just tell, there was one really after him, a very attractive woman. I said, just tell her that your daughter's a lawyer and she won't let you do anything unless she talks to me. And she went away. But it was, and he didn't have a lot of money at all, but he was very generous. Like, he was the kind that would probably just give away $1,000 to someone. He didn't have $100,000, but he would, and selling his house, I don't think he would do that, but you just don't know what could happen. And he was, again, 100% together. But you just sort of watch some of these things that happen. So anyway, any questions at all? There's some pretty good information online, too, about wills and power of attorneys, but the main thing is to sort of really sit down, figure out what you own, where you want it to go, who you can trust. If your children are looking like they're going to fight over your estate, I suggest you sit them down in your living room and talk to them about it. Because I just see crazy things where literally $100,000 or $150,000 goes to Toronto lawyers on estates. It's not cheap stuff. It's very, very expensive litigation. And, you know, again on the stories, we had a common law situation where they were living common law. They didn't have a cooperation agreement or anything, but they had it separated out. And he had his own money, and he had said to his children, you will get a certain amount of money. And here it is. And she'd agreed. Well, he then went to a nursing home. She had him go to the bank and sign over that particular account to joint names. And when he died, she got it automatically, the common law wife. Now, I don't know what her story is. Maybe her story is that she was entitled to that. But the children felt very, I guess, I mean, really sad, like really taken. And it wasn't a lot of money, really. But, you know, the deal they had worked out didn't work out. And another one, the father had remarried a number of years ago, and the children are in their early 50s, but he had promised them that they would be getting a certain amount of money when he died, and it made sense. Well, that's not what he did. He made a will leaving everything to his second wife. The 3 children were over 18 and self-dependent, and they got nothing. And they were, what they were upset about is that they didn't even get any of his personal things. They didn't get any of them. And then my last story on this is where wife number 3 got everything. A couple married 32 years, 3 kids. This is a few years ago. His wife dies. It's a small town in Ontario. He remarries a year later, and to someone that they all knew. A year after the marriage, he dies of a heart attack, and then he marries wife number 3. Wife number 3 says, it's mine. And she got everything. In that case, there was no will, but the estate was under $200,000, so the wife would get it all. And again, in that particular case, I knew the family really well, and I visited the daughter in California when I was there, and they were just so hurt that they didn't even get the furniture or the pictures of the silverware. And who knows what wife number 3 was thinking, but she didn't even give those personal things to the children. So again, lawyers often see the worst of families, but that's, you know, those are the kind of things you see. So that's why a will, and then updating the will, because if you remarry, you have to get a will. Your other one's invalid. So I didn't say that. I should have said that. So if you remarry, it's invalid. If you're going to live common law with someone at any age, you'll want to have some sort of agreement, a cohabitation agreement or something clearly setting out what the deal is between you, so that there can't be a bunch of disappointed people, but also litigation.